All righty. Are you recording? Thank you. So today is December 10th, 2020. And my name is Karen. We are here on the conversation on behalf of Co-Creators Convergence. And we welcome all of you. We are so deeply grateful to the conversation for making this space available. And we are so grateful to Co-Creators Convergence, which there's information in the chat about Co-Creators Convergence. So I won't use up any more time talking about that. You can look at it in the chat. And we have just been having these amazing creative calls every Thursday. We're going to continue to do so. We have one next week. We'll take a break for the holidays and return in the new year. So tonight, I'm actually going to turn this over to Elliot Robertson, who was on last week and took us through a phenomenal journey of our own hearts, the collective heart of one. And it was really beautiful to see how many people were so moved by the conversation that he initiated. And he invited our guest tonight. So Elliot, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Christian.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you everyone for forming the wonderful podcast and hosting it. I'm so pleased to be introducing Christian de la Huerta. He's been my rebirther for countless years. And so from time to time, I show up for rebirthing weekends or transformational breathing breathwork weekends. So as soon as Christian said yes to showing up for the podcast, I put it on my calendar. I guess that was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I've been looking forward to this opportunity to be a part of this as a participant ever since. With 30 years of experience, Christian de la Huerta is a sought-after spiritual teacher, personal transformation coach, and leading voice in the breathwork community. He has traveled the world offering inspiring and transformational retreats, definitely. Combining psychological and spiritual teachings with lasting and life-changing effects. An award-winning, critically acclaimed author, he has spoken at numerous universities and conferences and on the TEDx stage. His new book, Awakening the Soul of Power, was described by multiple Grammy Award winner Gloria Estefan as a balm for the soul of anyone searching for truth and answers to life's difficult questions. When, as this date approached, I was noticing that it's perfect timing, just divine timing, because I really do sense that so many people are longing to experience a connection with God and longing for a world where we don't trample on each other, a new world that is all about supporting the human family. And I really feel like Christian de Huerta has keys to point us in that direction. And on a personal note, if I were to draw a picture of Christian, I would draw him standing before God or an angel saying, I am here, Lord, here I am. I've never met anyone who's more committed to his servanthood than Christian de la Huerta. And speaking of being in service, yesterday I was watching John Gray do a presentation. He was saying that the divine masculine is all about service and the divine feminine is all about receiving. And I certainly now add to that he's not only one of the most wonderful servants I've ever met, but also one of the most masculine men I have ever met. Christian, thank you so much for joining tonight.
Thank you so much, Elliot, for connecting me with CCC and for nominating me to speak here this week. And thank you, CCC, for having me. I'm really quite honored. I've been following and been impacted by the work of Barbara Marx Hubbard for over 30 years. I've heard her speak numerous times and feel blessed that I got to be in an intimate setting with her when we both lived in Marin County in Northern California. So thank you. I'm really delighted, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I want to talk a little bit about heroism and personal empowerment and just kind of give an overview, and then would rather have it be a, a natural, organic conversation with you all, because I know that you've all been on this journey for a long time as well. And so much wisdom that is held in this group. So this book that Elliot was referring, Awakening the Soul of Power, is the first of a series of 3. The series is titled Calling All Heroes. And it talks about what it means to live heroically in the 21st century. We don't have the horse hitched outside and the armor and the demons to slay, except the ones in here. And COVID has forced us to expand how we think of heroism. For most of us, up until this year, we used to think of either superheroes or warriors or maybe first responders, somebody who placed their lives at risk for the sake of someone else or for the sake of a larger cause. COVID has expanded us so that we now include healthcare practitioners, our doctors and our nurses and our respiratory therapists who are really in the front line of this global pandemic, literally placing themselves and their lives at risk and making huge sacrifices in their families. And we're also even including the delivery people and grocery store clerks who in some ways are also placing themselves at risk. And what about the rest of us though? So that's what the book is about, and what the series is about, is how do the rest of us embody and own this word? Because I know many of us struggle with words like heroes or teachers or leaders. So part of what I'm doing with this book and the series is frame it in a way that we can all own it, that we can all step into that role of teacher, of hero, of leader, of healer at this most critical time in our collective evolution. So the first book is about personal empowerment. So it's about how do we step into power, like Elliot was saying, without needing to trample over each other, in a way that's not hierarchical, in a way that's not about force or fear or domination, manipulation, the type of power that doesn't require that we have to squelch anybody, put our knee to their neck in order to prop ourselves up and feel powerful. So how do we do that? And why is that important? It's like, obviously, when we look at the world, power is up, and our relationship to power is up for all of us to look at, especially in the US and in this recent election cycle. We've witnessed abuses of power like the likes of which we've probably never witnessed in this country. So power and leadership is up not only in this country, but really globally. And the book is for everybody, but it has a particular message, particular focus for women, stemming from my conviction that the empowerment of women is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world. Like, when I think about strategically all the problems and all the challenges that we're facing as a species, and I think about one thing that would impact all of it, it's that when women are in 50% of power in this world, we'll have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and wealth distribution and social justice and how we treat the environment, etc. And it's not to idealize women. It's not to put women up on a pedestal, because that's a huge responsibility that nobody wants. But it does point to the fact that for the last 5,000-6,000 years, the world's been really off kilter in terms of the masculine and the feminine. And this toxic way of expressing masculinity has not only oppressed women in ways that are just no longer acceptable, like enough, but it's also been oppressing and limiting and imprisoning men in these ways of misunderstandings of what it means to be a man. So I also include a chapter specifically about that, like, what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? So should I pause here now? And I want to read this quote from Barbara Marx Hubbard from one of her books from 30 years ago, because it really puts it into context, what we're talking about here today. And it says, what is this flame of expectancy, this growth impulse, this frustration which urges us to break through the given patterns of our lives, pulled as though by an irresistible magnet toward each other and toward a desirable yet undefined state of being? The flame feels like the blinding magnetic force that runs through the process of evolution, the force that drew atoms to atoms, molecules to molecules, cells to cells, and now people to people in ever more complex whole systems. It feels like love. Not only personal love for each other, one by one, nor only altruistic love for others, but also, and more so, a transpersonal love, which senses the fulfillment of oneself through deep involvement in the evolution of the world, in connection with a universal force. And so that's the framework in which, which drives my work, which is, paraphrasing Einstein, that you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. The way that, when I look at the world and I think about all the challenges, again, that we're facing as a species, it's almost overwhelming, or it is overwhelming. When we think about the environmental crisis that we're just now beginning to feel the effects of whatever it is that we have unleashed on ourselves and our world. When we think about the increased polarization, the challenges and the fake news and challenging on democracy and what is truth. When I think of terrorism and how do we bridge these gaps with people who would view us as demonic or satanic, it's like it's overwhelming that sometimes I think, I'm just going to go to the beach and have a lot of sex and eat a lot of dark chocolate. And then I say, all right, slow down. What can I do? Right? So then I reel myself back and I said, what can I do? And the answer is always the same, right? I can continue to wake myself up. I can continue my own process of healing and evolution. I can continue stepping into my own power, my own process of self-expression, and I can help as many people to do the same. And so that's what drives this book for me. To me, the way that we can pull ourselves out of this collective hole that we have dug ourselves into is thinking out of the box. It's not going to be solved by the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So in my understanding, my frame of it is it's a spiritual revolution. And it involves popping out of the ego mind, the limited perspective of who we are as humans. And so how do we pop into that? How do we understand the ways of the self-made prison that we have allowed ourselves to be limited in and by, and break into the greater part of us? And to quote Barbara again, once again, a new world is arising. This idea is the culmination of all human history. It holds the promise of fulfilling the great aspirations of the past and heralds the advent of the next phase of our evolution. It is the idea of conscious evolution. And I find it interesting that we're gathered here today when next week, the solstice, and this conjunction between Saturn and Neptune presages, the dawn of the age of Aquarius. So what a time of dramatic change, and both crisis and opportunity. So why don't I pause here for now and take some comments and some questions?
Well, I'll jump in. My business is called Surf in Your Soul. So just passionate about, I work with families and parents, especially encouraging them to foster their children the moment they come the moment they're conceived from their soul aspect. So when I heard about you from Elliot, I checked out the website, and then what was so fascinating is the energy, the kundalini, the recognition that I felt in my body. So I got the book on Kindle and I was reading it aloud to my friend here that I'm staying with, and I literally was weeping just in that opening part where you were sharing what the book was, laying out what it was going to do, and the piece about educating women, and at first my ego tends to go to like, or my mind tends to go to, oh wow, Christian, he's great, and it was like, I mean, yes you are, and yes, and I was feeling the hero in myself, the heroism. I was recognizing, you saw me just from the few words I read. I'm like, he sees me. This message is so vital right now. It was so, I mean, it moves me to no words, and pretty much anyone here that knows me knows that I usually don't lack for words. So
thank you so much for saying that, Karen. I'm profoundly moved by that. And yes, I'm so glad that you immediately, pull that projection back. And because projection works that way too, right? Whatever the psychological defense mechanism of projection, where we make wrong and we judge over there what's also here, also works for the positive, right? So whatever we admire over there is also here. So I'm very glad that you own that in yourself.
If anyone else would like to jump in, just wave and I'll unmute you. If there are any other comments. Go ahead, David, I will unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Christian, for the overview. And my life has resonated a whole lot in those areas that you speak of, and we've walked in similar ways, in different ways at the same time. I heard people speak of the place of the hero, and I just realized, and it was not a place of like calling attention to myself, but I've been kind of gifted in my lifetime to live out the journey of the hero, because I worked 7 years in group homes directly, and then for 27 years I worked for LA County Child Protective Service. Mm-hmm. So my lifetime, a lot of the time has been working directly with the underbelly of humanity, to put it to work directly with all the ways that we are not loving and kind and conscious with each other, and see all the devastating impacts of those things. And at the same time as I was led to do that, I also had to kind of like look back and look at my own shadows, And I really, for myself, my life path as an understanding of those places you speak of where we're going to. I can only get there when I'm willing to dive into the depths of my darkness and plow through it and work through it and learn to let go of it in some way. And it's treacherous, difficult work, but it's necessary work. And I feel grateful for that. And in those places, when I can stay in that place, I feel alive. I feel
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. David, and not only is it difficult work, it's heroic work.
Absolutely. And I catch that. But we're all heroes. And I mean, we all really are all heroes, or, we at least have the potential to be, and a lot of it is, am I really willing to feel the depth of the pain to get there?
That's it. To be willing to look at those shadow places in us, which we all have.
Yeah.
And to look at those places that are in need of healing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's nothing short of heroic. Rather than the alternative, which is what the mass of humanity does, which is run away from it and self-medicate it and numb out and not feel and not think and numb ourselves out with TV or drugs or alcohol or sex or food or exercise or shopping or gaming online, is like all the multiplicity of ways in which we avoid and run away from ourselves.
And I'm also all those things too. So it's like, so there it is.
Yeah, and thank you for being willing to work with the community that you do. I've I started out working with the addictions field, so I've certainly and with adolescents who were in the criminal justice system.
Yep.
So I've had my taste of that, but for the last 30 years, I've been blessed that I work with people like people who are here who are on a journey of awakening. So it is a different type of experience, which sure, we all have that dark side, but just by virtue of being on a path of remembering and awakening and being willing to do the work that we're talking about, with heroic work of healing ourselves, that is such a different aspect of humanity. So thank you for being willing. Thank you for doing all of that you do on all our behalf.
Yeah. Fortunately, I'm retired now, so I get to do these things
Yeah.
and find my practice in that place.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does anyone else want to jump in at this point? I'm just going to say that I'm just going to say, Christian, you have a beautiful voice or energy or something. It's like so soothing. And also, for me, it's a treat to hear my dear Barbara Marx Hubbard's words coming out of your mouth. It's kind of like, she never leaves me alone. Now she's a former Christian. But yes, the Dalai Lama always says that, civilization will be saved by, he said, Western women, if I correcting that, reporting that accurately. And, I've been thinking about, oh man, we do so much stuff. We're activists, we're doing stuff all the time. And I was thinking like, maybe I'd just like to run away and just go and find a cave or something like that. But, again, Barbara, just to be really short, whenever I go through some of these, these cycles, these temptations, she says, our crisis is a birth.
Yes.
And so that just those few words right there sums it up for me. And then, childbirth is painful. So.
Yeah. And thank you so much for saying that. Thank you so much for saying, and thank you and Bob for being the stewards of this spiritual pod of this cohort. And that too is amazing work and heroic work to take that role of leadership, of being focuses of consciousness around which other people gather. That's important work. And I love that reminder about this crisis of our birth, because in some ways it feels like we're living in really dark times. But if we frame it that way, that it's not the hopelessness of darkness, but it's actually the darkness of the womb, right? And that's like even applying it to this country, which is facing so many challenges right now. But if we put it in that framework, that it's not that it's in decline, America, but that it's actually in the birth canal to really fulfilling its potential, which we really haven't lived up to it, to the ideals of America. And I'm an immigrant, and I was born in Cuba, and lived under a communist regime under Castro for the first 10 years of my life. So I value, like deeply value what this country stands for and what it represents. And having been here most of my life, it's easy to take all the blessings that this country offers for granted. So I think that it's in some ways the fact that we're in that crisis point, that it's probably a good thing. And that many of us will emerge on the other side with a deeper appreciation for what this country stands for, and the hope that it represents really for all humanity.
Well, I think if you want to, I think we're complete. No one else is raising their hand at this point. So if you want to continue on with what you wanted to share with us, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm gonna share screen a little bit. Can I do that?
Absolutely. Let me just make sure. Karen is a co-host. We wanted to make you a co-host. There you go.
Yes.
Good.
All right. So
the screen there. Mm-hmm.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so this is, I wanted to share some of what I mean by transforming our relationship to power, because a lot of us are conflicted about power. And no wonder, we've been conditioned to think that, to be afraid of it. I've been doing retreats for 30 years and on this theme of power for about 10 years. And that theme emerges commonly at every retreat, that we're afraid of stepping into our own power because we think that we're going to abuse it. And then we've been conditioned to think, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what good-hearted being wants to be corrupted? So, but what they forgot to tell us about that quote is that Lord Acton meant it specifically about political power, not the personal power that we're talking about. So when you add that conflicted and misunderstanding about power and that ambivalent relationship we have to it, we want it, but we're afraid of it, and add to that, the fact that we've been conditioned to be afraid of emotions. So we're terrified of all our emotions, we suppress them, and especially those of us who happen to be in a male body, who since we were kids, were told, little boys don't cry. And interestingly, connecting it back to this thing about women's empowerment, because the emotions were labeled a sign of weakness, so only little girls cry. It's like what twisted mind ever came up with this? The emotions are not good, they're not bad, they're not strength, they're not weakness, they're just energy like everything else. And so what used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy, now we know from physics that it's true. The body's energy, the emotions are energy, and we know from physics that energy cannot be destroyed. So when we suppress our emotions, they don't go away, they don't disappear, they get stored in the tissues of our bodies. And after a lifetime of suppressing emotions, we walk around with layers upon layers upon layers of repressed emotional crap, which here we are trying to have a relationship in the present, and it's all getting filtered through that lifetime of unhealed past trauma and suppressed emotions, which we then start dumping on each other's laps. It doesn't surprise me that more than half of the marriages end up in divorce in this country. What does surprise me is that 100% don't, because we haven't been taught how to approach relationships, how to hold them, how to contextualize them. And we certainly haven't been taught how to empty ourselves of this lifetime of suppressed emotional crap, which, by the way, we have to learn how to do it. It's not an optional thing, because if we don't, what happens is that we suppress it, and then some unfortunate one comes and rubs us the wrong way, and we explode inappropriately to that particular situation because we've been suppressing so much. Or we suppress it and suppress it and suppress it, and that energy has to come out somewhere. So then it starts showing up as bodily symptoms, ulcers and heart attacks and cancer. So we've got to get this, right? We've got to not only learn how to feel our emotions and how to express them, how to own them, how to take responsibility for them, and how to express them responsibly, courageously, because we'll always take a risk when we do that, and compassionately, in a way that the other person can hear, not just dumping it, and not just throwing a tizzy fit like a 2-year-old. Although, when we think about a 2-year-old having a total meltdown, a total tantrum, a minute later, 60 seconds later, they're like playing like if nothing happened, right? Because they have their emotions fully, right? So they have that emotion, and then they're on to the next emotion, to the next experience. We get in trouble with the emotions because we stuff them. And what happens then, if we stuff sadness and don't allow ourselves to feel it and express it and clear it, it congeals and turns into depression. And if we don't learn how to get in touch with and express our anger, it turns into rage. And we walk around like these raging volcanoes that begin to wreak havoc in our lives and harm on our relationships. And so similarly, we've got to get this relationship to power. Because if we continue stuffing our power, because, you know, and saying yes when inside we really feel no. Like how many times have we done that? How many times have we stuffed ourselves into smaller little boxes because we were afraid that if we really beed all of who we are, and if we really unleashed ourselves in our full power and our full magnificence, that other people wouldn't be able to handle it. And our relationships might come to an end. And oh my God, we might end up alone. And this is all stuff that we made up in our minds. And we can talk more about that. And because, yeah, there are some people in our lives now who are not going to be able to handle it. But the ones that count, the ones that make a difference, what those relationships that are really based in love, those will be there on the other side of our full expression of ourselves. And so the same thing about power, right? We've got to get this, because if we don't learn how to express our power fully, what we're risking on a personal level are lives of unfulfillment and lives of soul devouring mediocrity, right? Of playing at life half-assed. And nobody can do that for us, right? There isn't anybody in this universe or any other universe who has the same genetics and the same set of experiences that make each one of us unique. So if we don't give expression to that own unique piece of sacred real estate that reveals itself in this body, ain't nobody else gonna do it. And collectively, like, we've really got to get a handle on power, because if we don't, we're going to end up destroying each other and killing each other, ironically, in the name of God. Like, talk about an abomination. So the first step, as I see it, in healing and transforming our relationship to power is realizing that we've been confused about it. And so this is the chart that I'm sharing here with you now, because as I started to think about this, I realized is that most of us are confused about it because we tend to associate power with things that are external to us, right? Things that are outside of us. So we tend to think of people who have money, people who have fame, people who are on some kind of hierarchy, or is a political hierarchy or religious hierarchy or a corporate hierarchy. And so, but the thing about those externals, that is by nature, they're outside of us. And so they're here today, gone tomorrow. And this global pandemic has been a reality check for many in that sense. You know, fortunes made and fortunes lost. How many corporations and businesses are having to close their doors? And so most of us, all of us really, are faced with the question is like, what are we going to place our trust on? Right? Are we going to place our trust on this illusion of security that a biweekly paycheck gives me? Illusion, because as we're seeing and witnessing, you know, that the source of that biweekly paycheck could be gone any day. And illusion, because the entire global economic system is that. It's just illusion. It's made up. We used to say that it was paper. It's not even paper anymore. It's just ones and zeros on a cloud somewhere. And is that what we're going to give our power to and place our trust on? It's like, I'm not. But what an opportunity these times are giving us to really go deep and ask questions like that, and also questions is like, is this really what I'm here for? And am I really giving full expression to this unique human potential? Because as we know, our time here is so brief. Like, you know, most of us, from looking at this, at the who's on this group, are like, we're at that point, you know, that we've at that point of life where we really get how ephemeral life is. Like we've heard it so often, you know, life, like youth is wasted on the young. And there's no way that when we're 20, 25, like, you know, like when we hear like, take advantage of your life, there is no way that we can get it. Only with the perspective of age do we get how fast it goes. So anyway, so I started realizing that there's a difference between worldly power, or egoic power. And we'll talk more about what the ego is, because it already came up in the beginning in conversation. And soulful power or spiritual power. So one of them is external, as I started to say. The other one has an internal focus. One of them is self-serving, right? So worldly power, egoic power, always has an agenda. It's always trying to get something for itself. Where the other one, spiritual power, is service-oriented, right? It's about making a difference. And because I think it's a fair assumption to make that everybody here on this call is service-oriented, is about making a difference in this world, because otherwise you wouldn't, if that weren't the case, you wouldn't be on this call. You'd be watching TV or downing a brewski or something, going for a walk, one of the infinite choices that we could have made, rather than being on this call. So I think it's a safe assumption to make that we're all service-oriented. And I want to say something about that, because we've been also conditioned to think that service is that self-care is selfish. And especially for those of us who are service-oriented, this is a really important to get, that self-care is not selfish. So think about it this way. Think about like a trifecta of service or a tripod of service, service to the universe, service to the divine, whatever you want to call that, service to humanity, service to the world, the second one, the third one, service to self, which is the one that service-oriented people tend to forget, right? And what happens if that third leg is not in place, the other two cannot stand. And so what happens is that we give and we give and we give and we serve and we serve and we serve. And if we're not taking care of self, we start getting resentful. We start burning out. And because often too, we're giving with an expectation. And so when that's the case too, we start resenting our service and we start burning out. And then that service turns into servitude. So in the same way that when we first get on a plane, when we used to be able to get on planes freely and safely and joyfully, first thing they tell us is put on your mask, right? Put on your mask first before even that of a baby, of a child. So we take care of this so that we can take care of others. And just that's enough on that. So worldly power is, like we were talking about earlier, it's by definition hierarchical. So it's power over. It requires that somebody be below us, that we can push them down and step on them so that we feel powerful. Whereas the other one, spiritual power, soulful power, is horizontal. So it's power with, stemming from the belief, the mistaken belief that there is a limited amount of power, right? So that power is a zero-sum game. Your having power takes away from mine. It's like, wait a minute, who said? Right? So that's another one of those misunderstandings. So that's, if you go a little further down the road, that's the reason worldly power is about hoarding. It's exclusive, whereas the other one is like, it's not threatened by you having power. Your having power doesn't take away from mine. So it's more about empowering others. It's more about sharing. One achieves its ends by manipulation and control. The other one through example, guidance, and inspiration. Worldly power is, and egoic power is about self-aggrandizement. So I think of, if you've ever seen a turkey in heat, right around this time of the year, how they blow themselves up and, they find that really sexy, I guess they make themselves bigger than they seem. That's worldly power, right? It's like it puffs itself up. And we don't need to look very far in our world to see examples of that. It's pretty blatant in front of us. As well as the lesson, the undeniable lesson that you could have all the power in the world and all the money in the world and you are miserable. So another one of the opportunities for us to get that in a deeper way for those of us that still need to get that realization. One, worldly power tends to abuse power, right? So, and that's one of the reasons why most of us have, good-hearted people have an ambivalent relationship to it, because we've witnessed countless examples of abuses of power, and we've been on both sides of that. We've abused power, and we've been the recipients of abuses of power. And again, all we have to do is turn on the news or read the headlines to witness multiple examples of that on a daily basis. So again, what good-hearted person wants to be part of that? So we reject it. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whereas the other kind of power, the spiritual power, has a very honoring, very respectful relationship to power. One, its strategy it's conniving, it's Machiavellian. So like in the workplace, I know that if I say something to Elliot about David, you know what, Elliot, David's been talking bad about you, and he's been trying to get your that promotion that you're going for. So by being conniving and Machiavellian in that way, and they're going at each other, then I step into the vacuum and take over the project or the opportunity. Whereas the other one is the soulful power, the spiritual power is more intuitive. It doesn't have a lot of words. It stems from within and has very simple language. Like very simple directives, like yes, no. It's like it comes from that inner knowing. And whenever we find ourselves building a case, pulling from here, pulling from there, is like we know we're coming from ego. We know the ego went to law school, and it's always building a case to prove that it's right. So this also applies to our relationship to power. One is secretive, and again, that comes from that tendency to hold on to it. The other one has a very open relationship to it. One is reactive. So because the ego is all about reacting, worldly power is that too. It's an expression of that. Whereas soulful power or spiritual power is more about responding. It's more about being at choice. It's a more considered, comes from a deeper place. And it's humble. Whereas one is self-aggrandizing, the other one is completely humble and doesn't have anything to prove to anybody. So I think of Gandhi, I think of Gandalf, in the Lord of the Rings, and those simple monastic robes and their sandal feet. You would never know the power that they hold until it's necessary, until it's called for, and then watch out. Like Gandhi brought the British Empire to its knees when it was at its zenith, at its highest point, without a single punch or without shooting a single shot, a gun. Talk about power. One is impulsive and reactive. The other one is more self-disciplined. Worldly power is all about fear and force, and we see that again in the news on a daily basis, and the misuse of power toward that end, toward control and greed. And the other one is love-based, and I don't mean love as a hallmarky or new agey kind of love. I mean love is like that fierce mother bear kind of love, like don't mess with my cubs kind of love. The love as the most radical, most powerful force in the universe. One is mind-based, so it comes from the mind, and so therefore is that strategic, manipulative part of us. The other one comes more from the body, so both the heart center and the power center, and it's that intuitive wisdom, the deeper wisdom of the body, to which we all have access. So what this feels like another good place to pause and see if there's any comments, any questions.
Let's go ahead and stop your share screen. Is that okay?
Of course.
Living in our hearts more and more, and the ego will be in the driver's seat so much less.
Yeah.
And I also think that's going to make us more available to listening to each other, more available to community. I really see immediately lots of small groups forming, and I'm going to be working on that. I just really see community having the power, and it going all the way up to the president of the U.S. and the world leaders. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be on the possibility of the ego sort of going away as we evolve, and making us more available to having true community.
That's a beautiful observation, which I tend to agree with you about where we're heading. I mean, it's still kind of at that choice point. I think we've made the choice, but we always knew that that other kind of patriarchal, hierarchical power was not going to let go easily, right? And that's another way that we can frame these times in which we're living, that we can say that it's the end of the patriarchy. And that's what one of the reasons it feels so chaotic and so scary is that institutions and systems that have been ruling the world for millennia are just no longer sustainable. So that's one of the reasons why so many people are in fear. And when we're in those places of fear and everything up for grabs, it's easy to then reach out to leaders that are going to be authoritarian and tell us what to do and put everything in a box, and we don't have to make choices for ourselves. So I agree with you. And one thing, my understanding of the ego, because there are some spiritual teachings that say that the ego needs to, like we need to kill it, that we need to annihilate it because it is the source of all our suffering. And that's true. It is the source of all our suffering. My understanding of it is that it's not all bad, right? Like, and that, like when I've seen spiritual teachers get into trouble is when they think that they have completely transcended their ego. Because my understanding of the ego, that it's part of what makes the journey of embodiment possible, right? If we think of Homo sapiens sapiens, we can translate that. One way we can translate that is humans who know that we know. So it's that self-reflexive consciousness. This is what allows us to look back upon ourselves and to observe ourselves, which is a huge gift. As far as we know, we're the only species that has a sense of self, that has that that individual personality. There's some theories that the higher primates, the dolphins, the whales, and the elephants have a sense of self. So for example, we've seen the YouTube videos where you put a dog or a cat in front of a mirror and they start interacting with that image as if it was another dog or a cat. So they've done studies where they'll put ash on a higher primate, a chimp, a gorilla, or even an elephant. They put ash on them, put them in front of a mirror. At some point, they go like this, right? So they something else is happening there. That's different, that's more evolved than a dog or a cat. But to make the leap to having a sense of self, a sense of who they are, we don't know, right? We can only project and make assumptions about that. We don't really know how they feel about themselves. We know that we have a sense of self, which is both a huge leap in evolution. Like Ken Wilber talks about how humanity hasn't always had a sense of self. We haven't always had an ego. And so when the ego evolved in us, it was both a huge, tremendous leap in evolution and also the source of suffering, because that was the first split in consciousness. Up until that time, when we didn't have an ego, when we didn't have a sense of self, we were at one with creation like the rest of everybody else. So now that we have a sense of self, we can feel abandoned. We can take things personally, like a personal attack or a personal rejection. We have a sense of our own mortality. So there's a price to pay for individual personality. So I say that all to remind us that having an ego is not all bad, that the ego is good for some things. The problem is that the ego has gotten confused. And a metaphor that I find so useful to talk about the ego is that if you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's the ego. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, 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 tiny part of who we are to think that it is all who we are. And to make choices, like really critical, important choices about our lives. Do I say yes to that coffee date? Do I stay in this relationship? Do I take that job opportunity, even though it means that I might have to leave the comfort of what I know and move to another city? We make all these big choices from its very limited perspective and always fear-based perspective. So my understanding of it is that what we're going for is not killing it, but healing it, right? Doing whatever work we're guided to do so that when, so that when somebody figures out one of our buttons, one of those unhealed areas in us that we all have, rather than reacting, which is what the ego does and takes everything personally, and then attacks the other person and looks for their weak spots, that by just introducing the element of choice and doing whatever work we're guided to do, whether it's breath work, as you were talking about, or meditation or therapy, whatever we need to do, or any of the other healing techniques that we have access to heal those past wounds so that anybody can touch that and we don't have to react. Like, we don't have to take it personally. And we can get deeper into that if we have
Awesome.
time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And so what
I'm
we're
sorry, I
doing,
didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't know who was next, but
no, that's great. No interruption.
Olivia, Zach, and me.
Olivia, and then Zach,
And me.
and then Bob.
Thank you so much, Christian. This is such a powerful conversation. And I am very partial to embodiment, and I work in embodiment, and having had a runaway monkey mind for most of my life. And what I find as a woman that has helped me get out of my mind is getting into my body and really addressing my body first, and learning how not to numb out has been a big job, a work in progress. And the other thing that I wanted to say is that I love when you were creating the list of the spiritual versus the ego, that you talked about inspiration. Because what I find when I need to lead a group and my ego is getting in the way, that what helps me is if I'm very porous and I let inspiration come through me. So I borrow qualities from Michelle Obama, whom I just think so highly of. She has warmth, she has inclusion, she has intelligence, she has courage. So if I'm going to do something where I need to kind of show up, even though I want to go in my cave with you, Noelle, you know, I borrow the qualities of Michelle Obama. And so I was really intrigued by the way that you were focusing on the body as part of your spiritual power, and also that whole idea of inspiration and support. And that's one of the things that I teach people, to embody their leadership by drawing on support and inspiration, and by listening to their reactive state, noticing it, but then shifting to something we call center, which is a much more skillful qualitative state that is embodied. So I wonder, I'm intrigued by the fact that you included those two things, and if you could just expand a little bit more on them. There's so much. I've ordered your book, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait to read it.
And thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, I think, we can't talk about transformation, whether it's personal or global, and leave the body behind.
Right.
Right. So to me that, and that's part of the problem, right? Is that we've created this false dichotomy between the physical and the spiritual.
Right.
So everything that we consider spiritual, we place away from us, far away from us. Like, where the hell is heaven anyway? How much further could we have placed it away from us? And then anything of the physical, we made it something less than, something to be conquered, subjugated, controlled. So no wonder we treat the planet the way that we do. No wonder we have body issues. No wonder we have sexual issues, right? Because not only did we animalize the body, but we demonized sexuality. When we know, we know that that sexuality is not only not bad and not sinful, but that before the patriarchal times, when the divine feminine and when women were honored, it was considered a valid path to yoga, to union. In the Taoist traditions, in the tantric traditions, and in the indigenous traditions that don't have this false dichotomy between the physical and the spiritual. To them and to indigenous cultures, everything is sacred. The clouds and the creepy crawlies and the fish in the seas and the body and the genitals, right? So, but even let's go with the premise of the Western religions that claim that God is omnipresent, that God is everywhere. Don't tell me that God is everywhere except for the bedroom and the genitals and the human body. It's either the sacred it's either everywhere or it's not. So yes, like, thank you for doing the work that you're doing to help us all embody and reclaim the sense of the sacredness of the body. It's critical work and heroic work, and juicy work.
Yeah.
And then
Yes.
the inspiration, I love that word because it comes from the same root, spirare in Latin. From that same root, we get respiration and inspiration or expiration. So in many traditions, in many spiritual traditions, and even in secular languages, one word, the same word, can mean spirit or breath.
Right.
So in ancient Greek, pneuma, from we get pneumonia, meant both lung and soul. In Sanskrit, in Norwegian, andi means both spirit and spirare against it's so tradition after tradition. So Elliot was talking about breath work, which is the healing practice that I've been using for the last 30 years. Which heals so profoundly and so quickly. Like, I was on a track to get a PhD in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist. I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. When I discovered breath work, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly, not only in terms of healing past trauma, but in terms of healing at every level, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and even physically. And I know that sounds too good to be true, but I cannot argue with results. It works. I've witnessed it way too many times to question that it has permanent results. And I don't know anything more effective in terms of healing past trauma. And the science isn't there yet in terms of explaining how it works, how just from breathing, all that can happen. But when I think about it from that perspective of spirare, of spirit and breath, then it makes sense. So that's what inspiration means to me, Olivia.
Well, what's interesting is that in the work that I do, which is created by Wendy Palmer, based on Aikido and mindfulness, the first thing that we do in centering after we shift to a more dignified posture, when we've just reacted in our personality ego, is we work with the breath. We inhale up the back, we exhale down the front, spiraling down into the earth, and that shifts our brain. Then we smile, which allows us to produce oxytocin, like a mother smiling at her infant.
Yes.
And then we expand out into the space, including everyone. So the stressor, or whatever it is that we've reacted to, we become including, and then we work with equality. But the first thing, if we can change that breath instead of the like this, if we can do that long exhale, then we're shifting to the parasympathetic, the relaxing, caregiving part of our nervous system.
Yeah.
So it's very much what you're saying, inspiration and spirit, but also breath.
Yes. Yes, and it's like, don't get me going about the breath. There's swamis in India that have that much control over their bodies that they can tell the heart to slow down, and it will. And they can actually mimic states that are hard to differentiate from death. They're like kind of these really deep states. Most of us aren't there yet, and will probably not get to those levels in this lifetime. But we can all slow down the breath. Anybody can slow down the breath, right? It's just a matter of making that choice and a little bit of self-discipline, right? To keep taking those deep breaths, which is what you're talking about, Olivia. That's what anchors all those emotions in us, because we get upset, we get angry, we get afraid. The first thing we do, we stop breathing, right? Or we take really shallow breath. That's what anchors those emotions in the body. So if we can just remember to deepen, like especially when we're upset or when we're stuck in traffic, to deepen the breath. When we slow down the breath, the heart has no choice. The heart has to slow down. When the heart slows down, the nervous system begins to quiet down, the body begins to relax. So it all goes back to the breath, right? Or it's at the core of every meditation practice, of yoga, at the core of all spiritual practice, is our most loyal and faithful companion on this journey of embodiment.
Thank you, Olivia and Christian. Great conversation. And I want to bring Zachary into the conversation. He's been waiting so patiently.
Thank you, Zachary, for waiting.
Well, I don't mind waiting. I'm enjoying the evening. I'm enjoying the group. And I'm especially enjoying Christian and the things he's been talking about, because at some point, these things are going to have to be learned in school. They're going to have to become part of real life. What you were saying about the anger people carry around and how it explodes. All you have to do is look at the news. Ordinary fender bender, 10 years ago, people would have just called it out and called insurance and made arrangements for an accident. Now it gets solved with a gun or a pistol. And so we have no choice but to evolve and to learn these skills. These are 21st century skills for 21st century problems. And so I so much appreciate this work that you're doing. It's sacred. Thank you.
Thank you so much for saying that, Zachary. And yes, the crisis is our birth. And I'm with you 100%. I think, like, imagine if we taught our kids, like if we taught them not only how to pass a test so they could get into college, but if we taught them about life, and if we taught them about the breath, and we taught them about the body, about the emotions, if we taught them about how to approach relationships and how to develop a sense of self so they don't have to seek validation outside of themselves. Imagine if we taught them about body, mind, spirit, and about how the ego mind works, and so that they don't identify with a baseball, but begin to realize that we're the freaking stadium.
Suppose we taught police officers.
Say it again?
Suppose we taught police officers.
Yes.
There'd be a lot less tragedy in this country and in the world.
Imagine.
That's where we need to go. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to our consciousness tonight, Zachary.
And thank you so much.
All right, then I believe Bob would like to enter the conversation.
And I'll run off of your microphone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Christian. This has been wonderful. And I've really enjoyed it being this conversation that has been. And the idea, this concept of soulful power, the way you articulate that with the list, it reminds me of how significant it is that we recognize our own power. When we, sometimes when we're in the streets with a wide variety of ages, protesting or taking direct action or speaking to our government, and we'll hear people talking about speaking truth to power, the phrase speaking truth to power. And ever since I heard Michael Bernard Beckwith say, you aren't speaking truth to power, you're speaking truth to pseudo power. They think they're the power. You, in fact, are the power. I haven't been able to get that sentence out of my mind after Michael Beckwith said it. And so whenever I'm in some place where that's the conversation, or even the phrase that we've all heard, for those of us that have spent years in a business environment as well, is, well, we have to check that out with the powers that be, quote unquote. Well, who are the powers that be? And so it's, I really appreciate an understanding of what you've expressed as being soulful power, as opposed to egoic power. And yes, it is on, both are on display in full living color 3D for us all the time. I might get to a question here in a moment, but I wanted to share one other thing that relates to this, and that is that I did a Facebook post recently about a quote from Van Jones. And the quote was, where is it? I've already got it written up on the wall. It's in that convergence of spiritual people becoming active and active people becoming spiritual that the hope of humanity now lies. And as soon as I read that sentence, I went, whoa, that's where I have evolved to be playing with others in the last 10 years. So I put it on Facebook, and it was very interesting, the comments, because the first commenter claimed to be an atheist and saying that, that this, that, and the other from her perspective. And all 25 comments after that reacting to it, and it very quickly turned into a conversation about whether people are religious or not, or whether religion and spirituality are the same thing, or they're opposite things, or whatnot. To my perspective, completely losing track of what was stated, which is active people becoming spiritual and spiritual people becoming active, and together we can accomplish a lot for humanity. So I think I guess my question is, what I'm interested in any sharing about that, but I also am really becoming fascinated in the time that we're sitting, particularly in American politics. Noelle and I have been involved in a lot of things that relate to social justice and environmental justice and democracy and that sort of thing. And I now invite the answer to the question for everybody on this call that are spiritual beings having a human experience. Politics is a part of that. And so I did one of these Thursday night sessions, and a number of people on the call here tonight were a part of that. And I would be interested in your perspective as well as to how do we find our hero, to use your term? How do we find our hero as spiritual beings to bring ourselves and our power into that part of the human experience, which is in fact in a political framework, I guess. So I think that's the question. And anything else you'd like to reflect on?
That was some really juicy stuff in there, Bob. You gave me chills with the Michael Beckwith quote. I hadn't heard that quote, and I also speak about worldly power as pseudo power. So I'm really delighted to hear that he also refers to it in that way, and also loved within the context of speaking truth to power, because as he said and as you're pointing to, is like the real power is within. And the soulful power, even though it's unassuming and simple robes and sandal feet, it is way more powerful than these illusions of power. That is what we give our power away to, ironically. I also love what you're speaking about in terms of spiritual people becoming activists. I think that if we went off and sat in a cave and attained a level of enlightenment, that in itself would be a huge service because of the fact that we're all interconnected. And I also feel like there was a time in human evolution when if we wanted to serve the divine, to serve humanity, we would go off to the monastery or join an ashram. And I think that what we're being called to do today is to bring that to the day-to-day, right? To bring the sacred to the boardroom and the bedroom, right? And to which connects to your other question, like reclaiming the heroes, like how do we find a way to embody that, right? And to bring it to the day-to-day. And it begins with making the realization, with the choice that we're not the baseball, that we're the stadium. So really critical to me that we understand how the ego works and how its machinations and its shenanigans, so that we know how it limits us and keeps us in the self-made prison of self-doubt and fear and playing small. And so to me, that's the first step, right? So understanding what we're not. And then allowing, like Olivia was talking about, my words, but my interpretation of what she said about becoming, I think she used the center, but that we become that hollow reed that the Buddhists talk about, so that we become that channel, if you would, for the universal life force, for the chi, for the ki, for the universal intelligence to express itself through each of us in a beautiful, unique way. And so how do we do that? I think of that scene from, I forget which one of the Indiana Jones movies. I think it was the one about the Holy Grail. I don't know what the title was, but it might have the Holy Grail in it. But it's the scene where he's standing on this side of this deep chasm, of this precipice, and then on the other side of it are the chalices. And it's not until he looks at his maps and has the realization that he has to step into the void. And as he takes a step into the void, the stone shows up to meet him, to meet his foot. And I think that's what it takes. I think that's what trust is. Like that we in some deep way know who we are. And in some deep way, even though we have to get beneath the monkey mind of the ego that Olivia was referring about. We got to get beneath that crazy, chaotic monkey mind, allow it to learn how to quiet it so that we can access the intuition, the inspiration, the truth that is inside of each of us, and then nurture it and give it expression. So, and it all begins by taking that step of trust into the void. And then it becomes, rather than having this adversarial victim relationship with life, or like if it only hadn't been, for what mom did or father didn't do, or if my parents hadn't gotten divorced, or if it only hadn't been for what the teacher or the minister or society or sexism or racism or homophobia, if it only wasn't for something outside of us, then I would be happy. And then I would be fulfilled. Whenever we're giving our power away, whenever we're blaming or holding someone or something outside of us responsible for our state of being. So that's also a really critical step. It's like, and it's not to minimize any of that, right? It's like, yeah, it's part of the heroic journey. Like life is not for the faint of heart. Mm-hmm. and especially doing it consciously. Yeah. Right? It's like life is gonna be painful. It's part of life, and people are gonna come and they're gonna go, and there's gonna be horrible things that we witness to. But if we remember, like if taking, the example of Viktor Frankl, that yes, life is gonna continue throwing curveballs at us, and there's nothing we can do about that. But what we do have a choice about is how we show up in response to the curveballs. Right? And that right there pops us out of that victim role and that victim relationship with life. And then the question becomes, how am I going to show up in response to that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Gives us an opportunity it does for us, for Noelle and I anyway, to wake up in the morning and ask what's ours to do today in regard to all this being spiritual beings. Yeah. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you again for being that fulcrum of consciousness around which conscious evolution can happen.
Well, speaking of life, Cassandra has put something very lovely in the comments.
Oh, yeah.
I'd just like to read, unless you want to read it, Cassandra. No, okay. She says, what I love about life is that it automatically brings us to the right moment to shift the right attitude, to allow self and non-self to see each other as equals, and thereby give us opportunities to practice the ways that is right for us to move forward. We are a compilation of who we have been, who we are becoming, and who we wish we were. When we get to know who we are, we sure do tend to relax and not fight the life process. Smiling as I write this.
That's beautiful, Cassandra. Beautiful, and lots of wisdom. And I hope you're not being selfish with that wisdom.
I know she's written at least one book. So she's also a student of Barbara Marx Hubbard's. So I don't know why she's being so bashful though.
Good.
To your power, Cassandra.
Thank you. It's time.
I just am here. Like everyone here, I followed the impulse that brought me to this moment. And I'm experiencing such a depth of that we're all okay where we are. That this is the journey. This is what informs us. This is what changes us. And if we're not being changed, then I wonder, why not? Big question.
Yeah, great question.
So thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you're bringing to this time frame. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Cassandra. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and your beautiful soulful power.
I don't know if anyone else has any other questions. We still have about 10 minutes. And then Karen and Asaki are going to wrap things up for us and tell us about next week's guests. So Kate, do you want to be unmuted?
I would love to be unmuted.
Okay.
I thought she was trying to
much.
poke my
I
eye
love
out.
this, and I got to go to gallery view here. I really love this. Know somebody, invite somebody next week. We've just met the most wonderful people. So thank you, Elliot. You know, I'm still beaming from the hour we had with you last week. And wow, this was just super great. Because I think, you know, we've been doing this ego crushing, busting the ego in trying to dip into these shadow spaces. But it's so much easier to do it together, and when we can share experiences, and your words are just profound. And it takes me right to, you know, you were talking about the sandals, and we talk about the moccasins on the ground, and that the spiritual people need to get more active. Well, indeed, it's truly happening tomorrow. And if you all bring your tributaries into this digital peace river, enlightening the way together. I was in a Zoom call where Chief Phil and Dr. Silas Rao were able to meet each other. And it was really profound. So these 11 days of ceremony, in 24 hours is the opening ceremony. Now, John Raymer's putting together the link, so I don't know how it's the Trello. I've seen the Trello board. The Zoom link is accessible. I know the website is globalfire.earth. And, you know, it was funny. I guess, you know, the Aboriginals have a prophecy leading up to this time, and also the Indigenous of Turtle Island. And apparently there's something about violence to animals within the prophecy that inspired Phil Lane. He said, I never thought I'd be vegan, right? But he's been vegan for a few months, and he's lost 52 pounds. So when him and Dr. Rao of the climate healers who speak so eloquently about how we need to move forward, but I was just thinking, oh my gosh, your powerful voice, Christian. And I mean, I'm sure everyone, but I was just feeling how much we collectively need your message now and implore you to see if there's any kind of fit within this enlightening the way together. 11 days of ceremony leading up to this big conjunction in the sky, giving us this opportunity. And so if we leverage all our networks of grace, and what they're doing is they're doing a daily ceremony, and then there will be talking circles. And, you know, I think for the first time in history, this is an entirely indigenous led move. Let me look around the room. I mean, pretty much we're all white folks. We have a couple of sophisticated, you know, people of color, luckily, on this Zoom room, usually. But I guess what I'm saying is I just feel this so intensely that whether you call it the soul power, that we must speak to those who can't be on a Zoom line here with us here today. So thank you for hearing my little commercial.
Yes, yes, it was a very lovely commercial, and we put the information in the chat. So if you know, if you don't know how to capture the chat, there's been a lot of good chat.
Yeah.
So if you go down to the bottom of the chat and you see the 3 dots, you click it once and it'll say save chat. So you don't have to worry about, up above it has everything about Christian that we put out ahead of time, and he also put his email there. So I want to get back to, thank you, Kate. She's always informing us of great things going on, and I appreciate that. So back to you, Christian. We have just a few more minutes left.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. I really appreciate your information about that event, which I didn't know about, and I also really appreciate your voice of inclusiveness and wanting to bring in those who are not usually found in these circles or able to get themselves to these circles. And like Noelle was talking about, it really is going to take all of us. That's how we get out of this one. That's, unfortunately, or fortunately, that's one of the opportunities of COVID, which is we all got to work together. Otherwise, we're just going to keep passing it on from country to country or person to person. Any other questions? Oh, Laura, I think one of this is waving.
I've asked her to unmute. So she'll need to unmute herself. For some reason, I can't unmute you.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to be part of your group. I just wanted to say that I just have so much gratitude for the fact that Christian has been part of my journey for over 20 years. And I can't express the gratitude that I have for you, Christian, in my life, and also my son's life. He is, I think he's almost 40 now, but I invited him to be on a Facebook group that Christian posts videos. And he said when he got on that group and heard your voice, Christian, it created a warmness in his soul. So I wanted to tell you that from Brandon.
Thank you so much for saying that.
He said just hearing your voice just warmed his soul. So and if you haven't thought, I'm sorry?
Send him my love.
I will. He wanted to be on this call tonight, but he had other things he had to attend to. But I also want to say, to everyone in this group, if you have not read Christian's book, I bought it and consumed it in 3 days. It's an incredible book. It's an easy read, and I couldn't stop turning the page. So thank you, Christian, for your influence in my life and for the witness that you give to the spirit and the universe and everything. You are just so appreciated.
Thank you so much, Laura. That really touches me deeply. Thank you for saying that. And you know, I wanted to say too that for people who struggle reading, you know, who needs a little bit more structure to get through a book, which is understandable because we're all live in such an ADD culture. we're all like overscheduled and exhausted and just bombarded by information all the time, that sometimes the last thing we want to do is pick up a book and receive more information. So that what I wanted to say to make it more doable is I'm starting in January a year-long coaching program, which is going to talk about not only the personal empowerment part of it, but we're going to talk about what it means to live heroically. We're going to talk about understanding the ego. We're going to talk about how to do relationships consciously. We're going to talk about life purpose and leadership and stepping into roles that express that in these most critical times that we live in, but stretched out and spread out over a year, so that it's a little bit at a time, little bite sizes, and with practices. Like that's one thing that I did in the book is try to keep the chapters short and always have practices at the end, because that's what's going to help us embody them and take them into our lives. So if you're looking also for a sense of community and dive into this journey of transformation, which is going to be an adventure, and keeping the number close, limited to 20, 30 people.
And I'll be there.
Yes, I'm so glad you're going to be there. Just you got my email, let me know, and it would be an honor to have you part of that.
All right, so beautiful. So look at how fast that 90 minutes, in my opinion, flew by. So Christian, I sense that you feel the gratitude from everyone here. And what a phenomenal co-creative process. Thank you, Barbara Marx Hubbard. Thank you for finding your way into Bob and Noelle's life. Light partners extraordinaire. Noelle loves it when I talk about her too. And Bob and Noelle, beautiful light partners. And, several other people from their walk with Barbara Marx Hubbard started Co-Creators Convergence. And this is such a co-creation. So I want to really remind you that you can go to co-creatorsconvergence.com, and some of the people on this call right now, you can rehear Christian's talk, but Elliot, Bob, Olivia, and Asaki Kai have all spoken, and I'm sorry if I missed someone. Oh, myself. To your point, Christian. So you can it's so worth it. Share it with your friends. My friend is sitting on the couch listening to this, and she's already like, I'm going to send this talk out to this person. So love the co-creative process. I'm going to hand it over to Asaki Kai, because she's going to introduce our guest, Carrie, who will be on next week. And then Christian has invited someone, and we're just getting that person plugged into the date because we're filling up so fast. So Asaki Kai, if you are able to unmute. Yes.
Hear me okay? Good. I am having some audio issues this evening, thus the lack of headset. My guest, Carrie Ann Livingstone, is a former student, a colleague, a friend, someone I came to rely upon. She's a part of my team, I'm a part of hers. We all, as these, conscious folks, we need a team to kind of keep ourselves level, and she is a big part of mine. The work that she does, and part of why I invited her here in particular, is it greatly complements mine. I talk about the ability to tap into yourself, and she grounds that work in very beautifully. What she's going to talk about next week is really life, love, and how to live from the self. So she's really an extension of all the conversations that are happening, including Christian. I couldn't help but notice a while ago, boy, that's a good tie-in to what she's going to talk about, and he didn't even know that was happening. So I see how there's a whole other level of universal truth happening in the thread of all that is being presented. But her presentation next week is just going to be about how to live authentically from the self and how to ground that into the body in particular. She is going to be bringing her oracle cards, I want to say. Yeah, so you'll get more of that good stuff. And Carrie Ann, I will say this as the teacher, don't tell her I said this. she's one of the best. She is one of the best. She has learned phenomenally how to move the channel through her body and communicate it. So we're in for a treat, guaranteed. And I'll be here too, of course, to introduce her.
Thank you, Asaki.
So much. I'm trying to just type in really quick here, and then if anyone wants to save the chat, carrieannlivingstone.com. And it's Daring to Suck. She's apparently, from what I've learned and quickly talked to her, very comedic in the way she's sharing, because I did write one thing down, that Daring to Suck is an empath's guide to navigate light and the what the F's with grace, ease, and humor. So I cannot wait for next week. I'm so excited. The 2 weeks after that, we will be resting, and then we'll be back in 2021. So thank you. And I believe, let me pop on gallery mode real quick here. Is Shannon, are you doing something right after this tonight?
Yes.
Yes, so Shannon is offering something right after this. If you're not familiar with the conversation, there's 20